Hi everyone, welcome to Unlocking the Sound, episode 2. My name is G and I'm super excited because I'm joined with my co-host Simon. Simon, how you doing today?
I'm good, yeah, good to see you.
Amazing. And today we're joined by a special guest, Beatie Wolfe. Now, Beatie has done amazing art around the world, and also in London at Somerset House, we had the Imprinting art exhibition as well. So we're going to be diving into that today, but also we're going to be touching on Beatie's collaboration with Brian Eno as well. So first of all, BT, I just want to say hello, and we're going to play a video in a second, but I just want to get a little hello from you there as well.
Yeah, how's it going?
All
Wonderful to
good.
be here.
We're super excited to have you. And also, I just want to put, if anyone has any questions for BT, Simon, or myself throughout the live stream, there's a Q&A at the bottom. So just type that in and someone from Avid will kind of come back to you there as well. So first of all, I'm going to play the video.
Hey, I'm Beatie Wolfe, I'm an artist, and this is Imprinting, the artist's brain. This is really a way of exploring the many channels, the many interests that we all have. Basically, via these phones, you're listening to a different part of the brain. All of these phones then run into this thinking cap, and each of the brain channels that you're listening to via the telephones is actually encoded in these tiny pieces of glass, which you can see around the cap. And that is this huge breakthrough in storage technology where you can write massive amounts of data, like terabytes of data, into glass, and it lasts for 10,000 years. To create each of the brain stations, I've probably edited about 500 hours of audio. Obviously, I've edited all of that in Pro Tools. I just always found Pro Tools so intuitive. I hear so many nuances and edits and frequencies that I think a lot of people don't hear. Having like a platform that's really supporting you doing that is kind of essential. I think art for all of us as human beings is vital, and music is such a wonderful part of the art world. You know, it goes in and we absorb it and it can do the most miraculous things. You know, it's a form of magic, really, in my opinion.
Wow, that was amazing. And I was quite fortunate to actually be there while that was happening, and it was amazing actually to spend time and get to know what went into that and how much work went into that as well. So today we're going to be touching on that as well. Um, Simon, should we start with some questions there?
Yeah, I mean, people watching that will have already got a flavor, I guess, of the fact that you've got your fingers in lots of different pies and that you've kind of got a lot of interests that all kind of link together. So I'd love to hear more about that project, but I wonder if you could just give us a kind of overview of the world of Beatie Wolfe and, how you got into doing all these different things.
It's quite a hard question in a way to answer because I couldn't really tell you a precise point with any of the projects, where I was thinking like, oh yeah, now I'm going to do something with climate data, or now I'm going to do something with dementia, or now I'm going to do a broadcast from the Big Bang horn antenna. It's kind of weird and wonderful in many ways that I think I always just I loved art, I loved music, I loved storytelling in general, but I loved so many things. Like I loved the natural world, I loved ecology, I loved philosophy, I loved literature, and it was almost like that idea of choosing one thing, which happens, I think, to a lot of us when we're kids. We have this huge, varied sort of curiosity and set of interests, and then we get asked to really choose a lane, through the education system, and almost like by identifying whether we're an artist or we're an engineer, even amongst our family and friends, we kind of adopt all these labels and these boxes, and we often then don't really question that later on. We just kind of stay in that lane. And I think I always hated the idea of being restricted in any ways. Like freedom was always the most important thing to me, to be able to explore what I was passionate about or what I was curious about. and to not really have any sort of limits to that in a way. So I think the way the work ended up going into all these different spaces was because I was so in love with music, but I was really in love with the physical music experience, records and tapes and CDs and that whole world. And then when that got disseminated, when we moved from physical to digital, I felt like we'd lost the ceremony and the story and the tangible art form that I was so deeply connected with, that I couldn't separate from the music, that I felt like there must be another way of approaching, like releasing an album that combined the best of the digital and the best of the physical, where you're essentially creating a kind of new way of experiencing a record in this multi-sensory and ceremonial way. And so that then became the beginning of this series of, I guess, new formats for the album or for music in the digital age, new tangible formats. And then from that, the net of what I was doing kind of just got wider, because I was ending up working, at NASA or Bell Labs or all these other places, and then finding out fascinating things about, CO2 levels, or seeing the power of music firsthand for people with dementia. And it felt like there was a responsibility to take those projects further and kind of broaden that already pretty wide spectrum of work, really.
That is very, very cool. Yeah, that makes total sense now, what you're saying, having looked at the stuff that you've done, because I noticed that even the first music you released was released in a kind of different way, right? You had kind of digital releases, and you had an app, is that right? On the
Yeah, it's funny, I actually forget about the app, there were like 3 people that had an app. This was right at the beginning of that whole world. I think it was 2009, and it was like me, Coldplay, and someone else. Wow. And obviously I wasn't Coldplay, but that was really simple. It was just a sort of a circulation of imagery and lyrics as people heard the tracks. It was for this kind of first EP, even before what then became the first album, which was this way of turning your phone into a 3D viewing platform that was a bit like the 80s Viewmaster. So it had this very retro, very nostalgic feel, but suddenly your phone became this like magic box. And my idea with that was because suddenly we were all listening to music on our phones, and it was iTunes, which I felt was already so boring. I mean, this was like not, streaming today, I feel it has got even more like disseminated. But I just felt like, well, if everyone's now listening to music on their phones, what if we turn the phone into something remarkable and old school and in a way, surprising? So yeah, that was for the first record, where you could watch it. It was essentially a theater for the palm of your hand, and then you could also play with the phone's gyroscope to create this kind of holographic immersive experience. And this was like 12 years ago or something. So that was really the beginning of the beginning of a lot of explorations.
So your whole project is basically replacing the album sleeve that we lost, I guess, that you'd sit and look at while you were listening.
Yeah, it's replacing the album jacket and sleeve and liner notes and kind of all of those components. But it's also, I feel like, ceremony within the old school listening experience. Ceremony was such a key aspect, and almost whatever you do, or whatever I do today, if I can create an environment that makes people present because they're seeing something in a new way, or they're walking into a gallery and they've got all these retro telephones, and then they're picking up the phones, and obviously everyone has a connection with those early landlines in a different way to the mobile. It's fascinating to me that actually those phones used to really bring presence in, you know, because you'd be on the phone and you couldn't kind of do other things simultaneously. I mean, you sort of could, but there was also the fact that the cord only extended a certain distance. So you were very much in this little world with that phone call. And, you know, so then when people are picking up these phones that a lot of them have an association with, that goes back to a time when those communications really were making you very present. But then you're hearing all these different, yeah, essentially, as I described, like these different parts of the brain and conversations or Foley or music or memories. And, you know, I think everything I want to do is almost create an environment for presence to occur and for a ceremony to occur, so that whatever people are experiencing, it has the ability to go in deep and stay with you. Because I think now we're getting hit with so much that's sort of sitting at the same frequency, whether it's social media or it's streaming or it's news or it's, you know, calendar alerts or whatever. Everything's sort of hitting us at the same level in this very intangible way, and nothing's really going in and staying with us. So I feel like, yeah, there are these key ingredients almost throughout every project, even if the output is very different. Every project has the same DNA, really. And that's about reintroducing some sort of tangible component. It's telling a story, and it's having a ceremony, you know, around whatever it is, you know.
So imprinting, that one, that's kind of not music focused, right? So there wasn't an album attached to that, right? That kind of stands as a piece of work, but there's an audio component, right? Is that right? Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go, so I didn't see it.
Yeah, it was actually very music based in many ways, because there were 8 phones, and 2 of the phones were music phones. One was a back catalogue, so it was called Music Rewind, which was actually everything from like the first demo I wrote, or say demo, the first tape recording I had of one of my songs from when I was like 8 or 9, through to, you know, a collaboration I just did with Laraji, like a quadraphonic collaboration. It was this whole kind of evolution, musical evolution. So that was one phone. And then the other phone, which was Music Forward, was all new stuff I'd been recording in this room. Just, yeah, myself, like self-produced and self-recorded, and kind of raw in many ways. But it was amazing how many people just were like, where can I get this music? And it wasn't, you could only listen to everything that was playing within the phones. You could only hear there. And that was also part of that making people present, because again, if it's this experience where anytime you're picking up one of the phones, you don't know what you're going to get. No 2 people are going to hear the same thing. And then you also can't capture that anyway, or you can't go back to it. There's something that makes you very present. It's almost like you have picked up the phone and you're listening in on someone else's phone call, and you're like, whoa, like what's going on here? So yeah, but it wasn't just music. The way it was described is a sonic self-portrait. So essentially it was like getting a portrait of the artist's brain, and that artist happened to be me. And so you had, you know, the music channels, you had memories, you had collaborations that I've done with people, conversations, all of the sort of Foley, the sounds that went in from a very early age, like the shipping forecast, or the San Francisco 49ers, or, you know, the tube. Like it was a whole variation of sort of almost like a sound journey of the sounds that had been significant throughout one's life. So yeah, it was very audio based. I mean, I would say of any project, it was the most audio based, because like I mentioned in the video, it's probably 500 hours of edited audio was making up these brain channels.
Yeah, I was gonna, obviously, me being there and actually seeing it myself and actually hearing it myself, I think you hit it perfectly with when I picked up one phone, I was so in tune with that conversation or what's going on there, that I wanted to just keep, you just naturally just keep listening, and you're like, oh, and then I can't tell someone else who's next to me like, oh, like listen to this because it's already gone, and then you move on to the next one and the next one and keep going through it. And yeah, I think that was like the art in itself to me was just like, oh my god, that was actually really cool. Now I've just heard about these different kind of stories and again, what's in the brain. But what was remarkable for me was like just seeing the glass. And that was just, even watching the video back now and hearing it back, it's like that's insane. Like
Yeah.
how, data on a glass. Yeah, I'd love to hear just a little bit about that as well, BT, if you can touch on that, because that was amazing.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually right over there.
Oh, you've got it with you. Oh, nice.
Yeah. It was something that I think what wasn't in the video, but like it's such a key part of it is it's ecological. So it's a way of writing huge amounts of data into this tiny silica platter where the data isn't sitting on the surface so that if it gets scratched then it's compromised. It's actually written, it's sort of micro etched within the glass, and that can then be stored in very kind of easy conditions. It doesn't have to be temperature controlled or anything like that for 10,000 years, where you're not using a huge amount of energy just to kind of keep that data on a server somewhere. So I found that really exciting, and I became aware of that because there was an idea to create a music vault, kind of like the seed vault, in Svalbard, but where there was a number of people, the Polar Music Prize and all these different international music council, all these people getting together and selecting works that they thought were significant, culturally significant, and etching that onto one of these platters or within one of these platters to then be stored in the Arctic Circle. So my music and my work was actually included in this idea, and is now in Svalbard in case we have a cultural apocalypse. So yeah, I heard about it through this project, and I was so excited because of that idea of almost that's where technology excites me, where you're using technology in the right kind of way, which is often very intentional, and but also it has that sort of archaic, it feels like just one of the old like storage drives. And so again, you're combining the best of the old with the best of the new, which is really what I'm always thinking about. What are the things we've lost that we need to reclaim, and what are the things that actually, innovation can really help us with? How do you bring those two things together so it really is the best of both worlds, as opposed to something like, the whole NFT phenomenon, which was so short-lived, thank God. But we're also seeing it with, areas of AI where it's almost like the worst of both worlds. I'm not interested in that. So that glass platter really kind of, really embodied something for me that was the right kind of breakthrough. And I think you could see it, but actually within the cap, you have these tiny pieces of the glass that are holding the data related to the brain channel, and they're positioned on the hat at the point that it corresponds to the area of the brain that you're listening to. So yeah, it was all very well thought out.
No, that's amazing. It was just great to see it, and I know we kind of got behind the scenes a little bit where we kind of we were doing the video and stuff itself, and actually got to see the glass and in person. And did you was it it stays in there for 10,000 years? Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, so I will grab it. Yeah, so it's 10,000 years. It, as in it will preserve it for 10,000 years.
Wow.
I don't know if you could, I think you're just getting a reflection, but like that's the size of it, it's tiny. And that can hold, terabytes of data. So pretty cool.
Wow.
So yeah, you're kind of touching on the other common thread through the stuff that you've been involved in, which is the kind of climate breakdown, environmental side, which is obviously like the way that you're looking at technology and how things could be improved instead of get worse. Could you talk a little bit more about the From Green to Red project? Because I think that's probably one of the things that you're most well known for. Is that right?
From Green to Red is a very special project for me because it really began, the seed of From Green to Red began when I was a teenager and I'd gone to see An Inconvenient Truth at the cinema with my best friend. And we didn't really know what we were watching. We just were like, oh, we feel this is important, we should go see it. And I remember being in that cinema being so angry as I watched this nightmare unfold, thinking like, how have we got here? How have human beings, how have, not even to put it on like my parents or the previous generations, but just like, how are we here? And obviously I was still kind of young and had no sense of that before watching An Inconvenient Truth. And obviously a lot of that awareness, a lot of environmental awareness had been around since the 60s even. So this was what, 2006? And it's like, what the fuck? So I left the cinema and I went back and wrote this song called From Green to Red, kind of like immediately. I wasn't even really thinking about it. I just wrote this track, which was really my response to the film. And then I thought, well, I don't need to record this song because everyone's going to see this documentary. And in 10 years, we're going to be on a different path. And in 10 years, we weren't on a different path. And almost around that time, maybe a little later, it was when I was doing my second record, which was a reimagining of the album jacket as one of the components we'd lost in the switch to digital. But as literally an album jacket that was cut by the tailor who dressed Bowie, Hendrix, Jagger, out of fabric, which was woven with my music that was recorded in the room where McCartney wrote Eleanor Rigby, Hendrix wrote Lou and Cries Mary. And I mention that only because it was this woven album jacket. So this song From Green to Red became part of that release. And then it wasn't until maybe 5 years ago, I was at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory giving a talk about my work to the engineers there. And at the end of the talk, one of the engineers, one of the NASA's chief engineers, a guy called Dr. Randy Wesson, comes up and he's like, look, Beatie, I think you should take a look at these, atmospheric CO2 graphs. And he shows them to me and I feel exactly the same feeling I had when I was in the cinema, almost 20 years earlier. And like, how it's not even just that we've not really done anything about this climate emergency, we've exacerbated it like tenfold. And seeing that data and realizing, how for so many people it's so intangible, it's so impossible to get your head around it, particularly when it's on a time scale like 800,000 years and human beings are becoming more and more short-termist and micro, and just literally thinking about like, what can I get now? And I felt like, well, I have to, there's something in this, like if I can essentially represent the data so people can really see it, and anyone, they don't have to know even what it is. It makes it very inclusive so that a child or a scientist or whoever it is, they're still getting a sense of where we are on the planet at this point in time. So that became this project From Green to Red, which was essentially revisualizing the data and setting that to the track I'd written as a teenager, as this, 4.5 minute sort of CO2 visualization piece. And I had no sense of it that it was going to connect in the way that it did. In some ways, I hoped that it didn't need, or that not that it wasn't going to connect, but almost that it wasn't needed, because maybe again, we were already on a better path. But it ended up really, being shown in a lot of places. I unveiled it at the Nobel Prize Summit after Al Gore and David Attenborough, where I was also speaking. And then now it's sort of been all over the world. And something about a core aspect of that project as well, is I wanted anyone to be able to install it with minimal gear, with almost make it as easy as possible to have, you know, in a exhibition in Singapore, or to have at COP26 or wherever it was, where there wasn't a team that was needed to fly over. It's as simple as someone having a screen or a wall to project onto and a Kinect camera. If you also want the interactive component, where as this digital weave is happening in front of you, you're moving your hand over the, you know, the timeline to pull out the carbon ppm and timeline sort of date. Because I really don't like, I also don't really get that if you're doing, you know, the idea that you're doing environmental work, but then your team is a 50-person team and you need all this crap and you all have to fly over somewhere. And I'm just like, well, that's completely defeats the point. So that was a key part of the project. And now I'm just about to launch the follow-up to it, which is called Smoke and Mirrors, which is about methane, the methane concentration in the atmosphere, set alongside big oil advertising slogans that have been used really in the last 60 decades. So in that critical period of when we started becoming aware of the environmental crisis, why didn't we act? Well, big oil, you know, the big oil industry has done everything it could to discredit and delay and divert from greater awareness around this, you know, climate catastrophe. And so this is a piece, instead of it being 800,000 years, it's just 60 years, but it's this critical time where you're really seeing the methane concentration rise like boomerang, like carbon, but also the big oil kind of tactics. And those go hand in hand because big oil has become really the leading contributor for that emission, which is much more dangerous actually than carbon. And if we could sort of curb methane levels, that would, you know, that would be really a big step forward. So and then that visualization is set to Oh My Heart, which was the song I performed at the Nobel Prize Summit, that was also released as the world's first bioplastic record with Michael Stipe and Brian Eno's Earth Percent.
And all that stuff people can see on YouTube, right? So the different projections in Smoke and Mirrors, there's a website for that, right?
Yeah, Smoke and Mirrors, there's a website for it. It launches at South by Southwest, so pretty soon, and you know, in a couple of weeks, where I'm also doing a featured session with the head programmer for the festival. So that will be the first time that this piece is shown. And, you know, then, yeah, people will be able to find it on YouTube and whatever. But for now, yeah, the website, you can go to the website.
Awesome. Well, we could talk about this stuff for hours. We probably ought to talk about some audio production process stuff as well. So I know I can see behind you in your studio there, you know, you've got a Pro Tools Carbon, and I've seen you using that before in that space. So all of these projects, music, Foley and all that, that's all, you're doing all that in Pro Tools in that space there, is that right?
Yeah. I mean, really, I made everything that you could listen to, you know, in that Biennale exhibition. Everything was edited. Everything was really created and edited here, apart from, you know, there were some radio shows or there were a few kind of external audio sources, but otherwise, yeah, all the music, all the new music was recorded here. I have a radio show in LA on a station called Dub Lab. So part of the phone installation, you know, that was featuring these conversations I've had with different people on that radio station. If they haven't been recorded here, they've been edited here. I mean, yeah, this is my primary audio space, you know. I have just got back from spending almost 2 weeks in Brian Eno's audio space, and you know, so that's and then we're going to be doing a few things remotely, sending things back and forth before I'm over there again. but it's been a wonderful, like, yeah, working in this way, kind of in a way very minimally, but also, yeah, minimally but intentionally. I feel it feels good. I kind of like doing things. It's nice to have very specific collaborators, and obviously like someone like Brian was one of them, but I'm so happy doing things on my own. And I used to work with probably a lot more people, a lot more, you know, different producers, and I'd always be sort of sitting there co-producing it anyway, but kind of just having like 10 more things in my head that I was thinking like, oh, we need to, you know, we need to switch that for this, and that edit's a bit weird, and we need to EQ this part. Like, but there were just I always had so many like next steps, and I felt like I was kind of tiring people with like, let's, you know, because I almost could work on something just because I get so absorbed, you know, for hours and not realize it. So it's so nice to be able to do that yourself, you know, and to kind of whatever you're hearing, you can create, and however you want to experiment, you know, you're doing it on your time and in your space.
I love it. Yeah, you don't need. It's nice to work with other people, but you don't need to have other people, right, to get your ideas down.
Totally.
I had a bit of a question there. When you first opened up Pro Tools, like, what's your approach? Like, how do you kind of stay creative? How do you get creative? Do you have like templates? Do you set up something where you just kind of, you know, that's what you start with, or is it just blank canvas, go straight in? This is my idea. I'd love to know like a bit about your process.
Well, I'd say the process, a bit like the projects, is different every time. I mean, and really different, even to the point where, say, with tracks, with music, I have found myself getting kind of too not comfortable, but too attached to certain settings,
Yeah.
or certain like chains or plugins or whatever, and then I feel like I then have to completely start from scratch, because I think every time you don't know what you're doing, you discover something kind of amazing. Whereas if you if you start creating a blueprint for yourself where you're like, okay, this is what sounds good on the vocal, or this is how I'm gonna pan the guitars, or, you know, whatever it is. And I feel like you then often just go to those sort of pathways, wanting to keep applying them, and then actually missing something totally surprising. So I've really now, more recently, just kind of just been like doing things I'd never do before, you know, and sort of seeing what happened, and not really having anything. Almost every session you're approaching it from scratch, you know, because I feel that's really important to almost reveal new, you know, parts of the art, but also you discover more things you like.
Yeah, it makes sense. I know I've talked to people that like to always start with the template, and then there's other people who are just like, no, I love to start with nothing in the tracks, you know, just start with a blank canvas. That makes total sense. While you were talking, I just thought of something else I wanted to ask you about, which was I'd seen that you have in the past done some work with AR and VR. So I wondered if you've done much work with immersive audio, you know, with any of the formats like Atmos or binaural. I know you mentioned quad a while ago. So yeah, is that something that you work with?
Yeah, I mean, when this project, the one, I think the main one you're referencing, which was Raw Space, the third record, which was released as the world's first live 360 AR stream from the quietest room on Earth, this place called the Bell Labs Anechoic Chamber, which was the place Helen Keller experienced silence for the first time, where rogue frequencies were discovered, psychoacoustics, like all these amazing audio breakthroughs were made in that chamber. And I was rebooting a program that began with John Cage and Robert Rauschenberg. I was rebooting it 50 years on. It's called Experiments in Art and Technology, where engineers and artists were learning from one another. You know, they were collaborating. And so with that, it was very much about essentially recreating the feeling of opening up Abbey Road and that I had as a kid, or any record, and having this whole sort of Fantasia world come to life around you. So it was this physical record player playing the album 24 hours on repeat from this chamber. People could log in, they couldn't shuffle, they couldn't fast forward. It was like the anti-stream is what it was called, the anti-streaming experience. But then as the record was playing and they were in this amazing ceremonial space, the lyrics would be streaming out of the artwork, all these, this whole visual world would be like sort of bleeding into the room, and the chamber walls would dissolve and become the landscape of each track as it was happening in real time. And it was AR and it was VR, and it was really the first of its kind. But to me, it was like, no, this is just this wonderful, like this wonderful modern day Fantasia, and you're in this incredible historic space, and then suddenly, you know, you're seeing these like sand dunes and this Giacometti figure, and so it was almost like bringing all of that artwork and that whole multi-dimensional experience you felt with records, just reinterpreting it. And at the time, there was a question about making it ambisonic, and I felt it was already so stimulating, you know, and each part was very well thought of. So even between each of the songs, you'd come back into the chamber, the artwork would sort of fade, and you'd be back in that room. And there were many people, heads of innovations for, you know, these big companies, that were so into that kind of stuff. And then when they'd see it, they thought the whole thing was fabricated, because the room and the visuals were so they were so cohesive. It wasn't like, you know, you saw we've seen so much terrible VR stuff, and I actually didn't want it to be watched on headsets, because I felt like headsets were so boring, and even right at the beginning, I knew that they were disconnecting and people weren't really gonna get into them. So I created this sort of space chamber, which this was part of this V&A exhibition I did, where you were in this NASA grade Mylar wrapped room, anechoic room, and using a coin operated viewport, the kind you would look out to see, you know, like those old binoculars, which was actually a converted headset. You could then watch the record come to life. And it was so wonderful to have all these like families be able to crowd around this one thing and, you know, watch in this stereoscopic way. But that's a very long answer to your question. But so at that point, and this was 6 years ago or 7 years ago, I didn't want, I felt ambisonic it would almost be a distraction from the main message, or the main aspect of this piece. But since then, yeah, I did this the quadraphonic record or collaboration with this guy Laraji. I actually have a track coming out tomorrow, which is part of the phone installation, and you know that will be that's mixed in, you know, Atmos, and there are a few things, yeah, that I have definitely been sort of thinking about, but I feel like that is still a bit clunky, you know, in terms of actually being able to, whether it's platforms or headphones or whatever, it's like hasn't really got fully integrated yet. So, but in a sense of actually being in a space where you're experiencing it immersively, I think it's very interesting, but I think it still hasn't caught up on some of the platform side. Originally, the piece that became Imprinting was actually meant to be a fully immersive audio piece called 88 Frequencies. it was a different project altogether, and it was going to be at the Art Institute of Chicago. And the idea was actually using code pioneered by Hedy Lamarr, which is this frequency hopping code, to present a record sort of as a split signal that was also moving around the room. And so then wherever you were in the room, you were hearing, different channels of that album. So yeah, that was very something that was kind of almost ready to go in 2020, and then lockdown happened. So at that point, I felt like, well, maybe the idea is meant to be something else.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, like I said, like BT, every time I hear you speak about something, it makes me want to go back and just go start researching it and looking more into it. So I love that. But yeah, I see like how you and technology just go so well together, and I'm excited about the future as well. One thing that I'm really excited about, which I watched today and last week as well, was the interview with Brian Eno, and I wanted to really touch on kind of how that relationship kind of like how it came about, how you got involved. The interview was amazing, and just like I was listening to it, looked back, and I was like, wow, I'm 40 minutes through already. Like I was just so in tune to it. So I'd love to hear how that came about, and I know you said you was with him last week as well in London, was it?
Was this a conversation? Was this our conversation at South by Southwest, or a
Yeah.
radio show?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes,
South
it
by
was. Yeah.
Southwest.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, what can I say? It's that relationship, friendship is a dream, really, because there aren't many people in, even when I was doing some of the early projects, there was always quite a small list of like, oh, if someone came across the work, oh, you must know this person, or this is what you're doing is similar to blah blah blah. And it was funny because I also have a thing where if there are people in the peripheral who I know are fascinating people and kind of like-minded, I almost want to learn the least amount about them because I don't want to be influenced in any way. So Brian and I came into contact, or we connected around, a couple of years ago, when really around the climate art space, because of the project From Green to Red, and him really getting very passionate about seeing what he could do about, the music industry, essentially rethinking its relationship with the planet, and almost creating a way that the music industry could start giving royalties to the planet. So we had our first conversation, and it was like an instant connection. And then we did the talk that I think you watched, which South by Southwest keeps pulling out as like the best of its I think the festival's been going for 25 years, and just 2 days ago there was another article being like the best of South by Southwest, and we were number 3 above Obama, so we were happy about that. And then between just doing some of those environmental projects together, and then then getting in the studio together and making music together, and it just feels like it's just a very natural fit in terms of the things we care about, what we feel art it is, really why we make art. Obviously the responsibility we have to protect our planet and to do whatever we can, and that creativity, that kind of flow of just the way we like to make things. And it's like a wonderful alignment, really.
No, I love it. Like you were saying, like just I love like the alignment, and just everything goes hand in hand really well, which is amazing. And just hearing it back, it just makes you really want to again just start researching more and going, oh, actually, I want to learn a bit more about that. Let me go into that. But BT, I know we're yeah. I mean, I've just realized the time as well there, but it's amazing kind of having you on today and talking about everything. And just before we do wrap up, I'd love to know kind of where people can find your work, or people can kind of look into your stuff and what you've done, and kind of all the important things. So just anything that you want to kind of let us know, that'll be amazing.
Yeah, well, I've got a weird name, so that people can just it's not going to be hard to find. And yeah, probably the website would have most of the recent projects there.
Okay, awesome. I know I'm definitely looking forward to the future of knowing you as well, BT, and just seeing kind of all the great stuff that you're gonna have out. Hopefully we see some more stuff in London as well, all around the world. But yeah, for me and Team Avid, thank you so much. Simon, you might have a couple words there as well. But
No, you summed it all up. That's fantastic. Yeah, no, it's a real pleasure to chat with you. Love
Oh,
stuff.
so lovely to chat with you both.
yeah, thank you so much.
It's been really fun.
No, it's been amazing. And thank you to everyone out there who's been watching today. Hopefully this has been great, and we're looking forward to doing more episodes like this in the future. Thank you, everyone.